Go to councilors. Welcome to our council meeting. I'm hearing echo. We all good? Can we get that sorted? All right. Perfect. Fantastic. Hey, welcome councilors and staff to our full council meeting for the 29th of August, 2024. We will open with a karakia.
Kia ora, councillors. Whakataka taho ki te uru, whakataka taho ki te tonga, kia makinikina ki uta, kia mataratara ki tai, e he aka ana te arakura, he tio, he huka, he ho hu, ki hei mauri.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Chief Executive. Just before we get underway, just for those who may not be aware, a number of us attended the LGNZ conference, and they had an awards event, and we were recipients of the highly commended Super Steward Award. This was a joint application between Hauraki District Council, Waikato District Council, and Waikato Regional Council for the work that was undertaken on the Wharekawa coast. Thank you, Jennifer and Warren, Councillor Nicol, Councillor Marr, and Councillor Dunbar-Smith, who have represented our council in that work. So thank you very much. It was nice to see those efforts recognized on the national stage. So well done, everyone. Okay, so we've got a reasonably light agenda today. So here's hoping we should be through this by, should we aim for 12:30? Here's hoping. We've got a couple of minutes to get through, and then our first item of business will be the Waikato Waters Done Well, and we have visitors in the chamber to work us through that item. Okay, so we'll start. We've got our health and safety statement that was on page 5 of your agenda. There's no changes to that. But since we do have externals in the room, just a very quick run through.
Good morning, everyone. Just a quick summary. If in the event of an emergency, just follow the directions of staff. The nearest fire exit is through the main council doors, and to the right, there will be wardens. If you require assistance during any evacuation, just let staff know.
Great, thank you very much for that, Dave. Apologies, we've got apologies from Councillor Smith and Councillor Mahuta. Any other apologies? We've got a mover in Councillor Downard, a second in Councillor Strange. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Confirmation of the agenda. Councillor Hughes to move. Councillor Strange second. And just noting that highlighted that the order of items shall be set out in the minutes just in case we need to move things around to suit people's ability to attend and speak to the reports. So we've got a mover and seconder. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Disclosures of interest, any additional disclosures that have not already been registered, or any disclosures of interest with regard to items before the council today? Nope. Okay, so we'll move on to our minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes, the first one to confirm and the second one to receive. So we've got the minutes of the council meeting for the 25th of July. This is on page 7. Oh, we have Councillor Graff online as well, just noting that. Oh, and Councillor Kneebone online. So the minutes for the 25th of July, we've got Councillor Mover and Councillor Strange, second and Councillor Downard. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And a second set of minutes, and we are receiving these minutes. This is for the Future Proof Public Transport Subcommittee for the 2nd of August. Mover and Councillor Strange, I'm happy to second those. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. We'll move to item 7.1. This is on page 23 of your agendas. Waikato Water Done Well, presentation to council elected members. We've got in the council chambers with us today, we have Vaughn Payne, and we have Kelvin French and Don McLeod to present this paper to us. But first, I'll turn over to you to introduce.
Yeah, thanks, councillors. So you've been aware that this work on how that we might set up to do manage some of the waters in the region has been ongoing for some time. There's going to be a substantive presentation and introduction to it, but what I just thought I'd do is just introduce the roles of Don, Vaughan and Kelvin, in the sense that Don has been leading the charge from a chief executive point, trying to coordinate things amongst the chief executives in this space. And of course, Don, who's the chief executive of Matamata Piako District Council, has a background in waters management, has extensive amount of experience in this area. Vaughan, in this role, he's been engaged by the chief executives and the councils in the region to bring together a potential way of managing things in the Waikato, which would be consistent with the government direction. And Calvin French is the chief executive of CoLab, which is the local area shared service organisation for the Waikato, who are providing administrative support and doing work behind the scenes to assist this whole project. So, Don, I think you're going to introduce it. Over to you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Pam. I was going to say Mayor, but of course I'm in the Regional Council chamber, Chair Pam, and thank you very much for the courtesy of allowing us some time today to talk to you, to the council. This, as Chris has said, that this is the never-ending story, and we've been going at Three Waters now for a number of years, and we still seem to be on Chapter 1. And what we'd like to put in front of you today, perhaps, is some issues you might like to reflect on and think about in terms of the role and the participation of how Waikato Regional Council might assist in this space, just on. This latest process started as a consequence of the Mayoral Iwi Chairs Forum, suggesting that the chief executives provide some guidance on what structures and issues needed to be reflected on as part of central government's change in policy from Three Waters to local waters done well. Now, at that stage, I asked the question, and I can recall the day in Tokoroa where I asked the question, who knows how much capital renewal work we've got scheduled in the greater Waikato over the next 10 years? Now, as it happened, everyone was just at the start of their LTPs, so it was good timing. But no one could answer that question. I couldn't answer that question. But as it's turned out, we've identified the fact that in the waters space, in the next 10 years, there is a commitment in our LTPs for $5 billion worth of work in that time frame. Now, that doesn't count the $1 billion a year that Watercare are going to be expending over the next 10 years. So they've got 10 billion, we've got 5 billion, and Western Bay have got 3 billion. That's $18 billion in 10 years. Now, we've spoken with industry, and there is no way they can deliver that work. There is no way they've got the capacity to deliver it. And if there's one thing civil contracting industries don't want to do, is they don't want to invest in skills and plant and equipment without having certainty as to what their workload opportunities are going forward. I suppose the reality is, and I suppose I shouldn't admit it in this forum too loudly, but the reality is we will not get that work done in that time frame. It's just not physically possible. The industry doesn't have the capacity. So we reflected on that and we thought, well, what are some things we can do in order to address that challenge? Because you as the regulator obviously want to see effort and energy put in to addressing non-compliance issues. So it occurred to us that one opportunity to deliver or improve our delivery on that level of capital, they've got 10 billion, knowing that there's a whole lot of other industry and Western other users 3 billion that's competing for the same resources that we're looking for, is to aggregate. And it then further occurred to us that if we're going to aggregate, we're in a much better position to approach the regulators such as Te Mata Arawai and the Waikato Regional Council and sit down and have a meaningful discussion about whether there are possibilities to, rather than doing all that work or committing to it and making an unrealistic commitment, is it possible to take that out to 15 years? So we can't do that as individual councils, but potentially we could do it at an aggregated level. The other thing that occurred to us is, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the presentation, is that when we come to do our point discharge consent processes, the process at this stage, as it is at the moment, leads you down a path to simply address specific issue of discharge at that point in time, at that point in the river. And we end up expending many hundreds of millions of dollars, and are scheduled to spend many hundreds of millions of dollars, in a way that potentially is least effective in terms of the health of the river. And there is a more effective way to address the health of the awa. And so what we're here today is just to explain that in a little bit more detail, and suggest that the part, or the role that Waikato Regional can play
for the country and for our region. It is not a decision-making forum. It is what I would call a leadership forum. Their role has simply been to come up with some recommendations that now sit with each council for decision-making. Thanks, Dave. So what have we found? And there's three groups of, I'll probably go back because if I can just stay on the slide, because there are other findings which, unless the slides are out of order, can you just go flick through a couple of slides, please, Dave, and just see if it's an ordering issue. Yeah, I'll start there. Thank you. So the Waikato is diverse, as we know, diverse communities, diverse councils, diverse needs. But despite that diversity, there's a strong willingness from everyone to work together, and you'll see that in your own issues that you work through with councils and with our iwi partners. And the following table is an assessment by each chief executive. Thanks, Dave. Yes, that table. This is an assessment by each chief executive of what they see as the main challenges for their council. We've got the councils on the left-hand side, and across the top of the slide, if you like, are different challenges. So we have debt capacity issues for some, affordability, the availability of a workforce, whether that's staff and or suppliers, delivering capital works. Business continuity is an issue that's particular to Waikato District Council because the contract they have with Watercare expires in 2026. So they need to find a home for their water business. Compliance and consenting are also challenges. And what else do I need to say on this? I think the next few slides will start to dive into a bit more detail for each issue.
Can you just confirm, is this just wastewater, is this wastewater and water? And I just want to point out to councillors and the staff that Neil Shaw's in the room, and he's the team lead of the regulatory part of Taumata Arawai, who sits in our building upstairs. Forgot to acknowledge you, Neil.
Good. Yeah, so this is all free water, so drinking water, wastewater and stormwater, and it's the CEs were asked to look at not just what their current challenges were, but look out in terms of the next 10 years or so. So it's sort of future focused challenges, not just current. Thanks, Dave. So if we look at Waikato Capital Works, which is probably the biggest opportunity that's in front of us. So there's about $7.5 billion sitting in the 10 territorial authority long-term plans that relate to Three Waters or water services. Of that $7 billion, $5 billion is about capital works, meeting growth needs, renewing pipes, plants, meeting consent, upgrades, those sorts of things. In terms of asset condition, it's not too flash. If you look at our wastewater network, only 44% of our wastewater network is rated average or better. And I think that's probably a particular concern to the regional council because it can result in pipes breaking, wastewater getting into the stormwater system, getting into our waterways. Probably the next issue is also a concern that we lose about 11 Olympic-sized pools of treated water per day. So that's 11 pools that could stay in, whether it's a spring, whether it's a river, as opposed to being taken out of that water course, treated, and then lost to groundwater. That's probably enough on that one. Thanks, Dave. This is a profile of the Capital Works program for all councils collectively in the next 10 years. So the light yellow dashed line at the top is population growth. The grey line at the top is the view of staff about what level of investment they believe is necessary to meet the needs of water services for each council, and we've collated that to provide a collective view. The light blue line at the bottom is the level of investment for capital works in the long-term plans in 2021. The red line is where the long-term or draft long-term plans were in March, and then the dark blue line is where they landed in July, noting affordability issues and things like that. So 2 points I'd make. One is, while population's increasing, in general, our investment and growth in capital works is not increasing overall. So there's a disconnect there. Secondly, the lumpy nature of that investment, and without being, so I suppose just being honest, and this is what our councils will all generally acknowledge, a long-term plan generally is about investment for the first 2 to 3 years, and then staff know that it's going to come up for review in 3 years' time, so they'll put the investment in the first 2 to 3 years for the next 10 years. So they're not really 10-year plans, they generally become 3-year plans.
Push it out.
Or push it out beyond the 10 years. So year 11 might have a bit of a spike, but we can't see it. But I think with economic regulation coming, which will require, where councils are going to have to open their books, they're going to have to demonstrate that they're making the required investment to meet the needs of the regulators, to meet the needs of customers. You're not going to be allowed to have such a lumpy nor declining profile of investment going forward. And then, Dave, with your skill, can we go back to that colourful table back? So this, yeah, that one, thank you. So knowing that picture around investment in our long-term plans, this tries to look at how affordable is water at the moment for ratepayers. So we've got our councils listed. For every council, the average water rates for 2024. And then what we've said is where the average water rate is more than 2% of the average household income, there's an affordability challenge. And so you can see that Thames Coromandel and Waitomo currently have affordability issues. Then we've looked at the average water rates in 10 years' time and what affordability looks like in 10 years' time, and that you can see more councils having affordability issues. And this is based on long-term plans. So if we accept that long-term plans aren't really investing enough because they're trying to just look at the first 3 years, not 10 years, we think that this is a conservative estimate of what the affordability scenario looks like. Now, 2% of average household income is arbitrary. Watercare use 1.5%, so it's even a tougher threshold. Thames Coromandel have adopted 2.5%, so on that they would be green. But the point is, it's indicative that there's an issue around affordability rather than getting hung up on the exact numbers. So it's just indicating an issue, if you like. Thanks, Dave. Now, if you can find out where we left. Yes, and sorry, the only other point I'd make around that graph is it's average household income across the whole of a district, not just the households who are connected to the water. So if the average household income of those who are connected to water supply or wastewater services ends up being lower than the overall average, then that affordability issue might look a little bit worse. Thanks. Yeah, so workforce. so I'm slowly working through the different challenges at a regional scale. Workforce, I think the last time we looked at a survey of the average age of our workforce across New Zealand, I think it was about 58 years old. And so we have if you like, a challenge around an ageing population, which isn't limited to the sector. I think the other point, as Don pointed out, is with the lumpy nature of investment, council by council, it's really hard for the supply chain to ramp up and then let whether it's equipment, whether it's staff, they're always ramping up or ramping down because it's such a lumpy nature. And the idea is, as we get to the recommendations, if we can aggregate a capital works program across the region, then we can perhaps start to smooth the pathway and investment required to meet that $5 billion of investment that's proposed. Compliance consenting is a challenge for most councils. We note that Waipa and Hamilton City are pretty good in this space, both in terms of regional council and Taumata Arawai. But we note that 1/3 of all consents expire in the next 7 years, and that consents are a major driver of new capital works. Thanks, Dave. So that's sort of generic findings. If we move now onto financials, so we've done some financial modelling, putting all the long-term plans together, and we find that not everybody needs a CCO, but everybody could benefit from a CCO. Modelling shows that by aggregating services, we can achieve more with the same revenue. We really wanted to be able to say to each council, this is your water rates now, and if you aggregate it, this is how it might change. But because councils collect revenue quite differently, some have differentials, they might charge commercial users twice as much as residential and those sorts of things. It's really hard to compare what we call kina with kina. We know there's still a large gap between what staff believe is the investment required and what's sitting in long-term plans. We know that for some councils there will be a significant increase in water rates under the status quo. And we do believe that staying connected to the local government funding agency is the most pragmatic option and cost-effective option from a borrowing point of view going forward. Thanks, Dave. So because we can't compare easily water rates in an aggregated model, we've said, well, what if we looked at some efficiency gains using an assumption of 1% per annum? And you might go, well, why 1%? You know, is that realistic to try and achieve 1% efficiency per year? By comparison, you may have heard under the previous reform, Scottish Water did some financial modelling, and there was a lot of criticism of that from some councils. They assumed an efficiency target of 2% per year. Watercare have an annual efficiency target of 4%. And you might remember the Cranley work that was done for Waipa, Waikato District and Hamilton City, looking at a water CCO about 5 years ago. And Cranley assumed 4% efficiency target. So we think 1% is conservative. It's enabling us to model some efficiency benefits without overstating those benefits. And if we look at the whole of the Waikato region, all councils aggregating water services, after 10 years, there's an efficiency gain of $340 40 million. If we just looked at the Hauriki Coromandel councils, so Matamata Piako, Thames Coromandel and Hauriki, is around 60 million. If we looked at the 7 councils in the Waikato River catchment, that's 280 million after 10 years. And then the whole region without Hamilton was modelled at Hamilton City Council's request, and that comes out at 200 million. Now, those numbers are after spending $100 million to find efficiency savings. So it's a spend to save result. And I think the other point around this modelling is that we assume that you won't get any efficiency savings in the first 3 years, because you've got to bed in the organisation, bed in the system. So this is in effect 7 years of savings. Thanks, Dave. And so that's all CapEx, all OpEx. But if we look at just CapEx in the same spatial options, these are the results. And we could have chosen different efficiency targets, but we think we don't want to overstate the benefits, but there are clearly some benefits. Thanks, Dave. This is possibly will be of interest to the Regional Council, and this is over and above efficiencies. Can we be smarter in the consenting space? So we have multiple councils and multiple consents in a river catchment. At the moment, each council approaches their consents on a plant-by-plant basis and a council-by-council basis, as opposed to looking at the whole river and going, do all these consent renewals make sense from a river point of view? What if we looked at the collective impact we're having on the river, look at which plants actually need to be prioritised in terms of upgrades, and go what's a prioritised program look like? In other words, try and take a river view or a catchment view as opposed to a plant by plant or council by council view. And in effect, it is te mana o te wai, te ture whaimana type approach in our view. And put up the example of Matamata Piako, where they've got 5 wastewater treatment plants, and they've tried to look at what's the level of nutrients coming out of each plant, looked at how they relate to each other, and tried to do some nutrient balancing between those 5 plants. And so working with Chris's and Brent's team, they have lodged consents for those 5 plants together. If they'd lodged those consents individually, they would have typically have spent $6 million. They believe they're only going to spend $2 million through a collective approach. And subject to the consent conditions that pop out the other end.
That's right.
They're hoping that they'll save $20 million on capital works. So that's one council in the catchment. What if you took all 3 councils, in fact, 4 councils in the Waiho Piako catchment, because you've got South Waikato also with Tiro and Patararu in the Waiho Piako, and took a river view, what might the capital works savings be and the consent processing savings be for ratepayers by taking a collective view? And we acknowledge that from a consent authority's point of view, you can do that now, but perhaps it's quite challenging tying those consents together under different councils, because they all have their own individual budgeting processes, which are subject to change through those budgeting processes. But by having a single capital works program between those councils and one organisation managing those budgets, then you're more likely to be able to realise this smart consenting opportunity. Thanks, Dave. Compliance. This is a summary of the compliance situation, as we understand it, for each council across the three waters and also Taumata Arawai. And you can see that in general, you've only got 2 councils without challenges in the last financial year, and this is just the last financial year, I think. But in general, most councils have challenges in the compliance space. Thanks, Dave. So the last finding you might be pleased to hear is about showstoppers. And the idea here is we might go to any particular council and say, hey, we've got a really good financial business case for you to aggregate your water services with your neighbours. And they'll typically say, well, we've got what we call local concerns over and above financial concerns. And so we've put up examples on the slide, concerns about what's their local voice and influence going to be like in a larger organisation. What about local needs of Matamata over Hamilton? Is Matamata's needs still going to be prioritised? What about giving effect to Matamata Piako's Treaty 7 obligations in a larger organisation? And hey, our community is really concerned about the ownership of assets. What's the go with that? So we've spent a lot of time working with each council to understand what those local concerns are and making sure that we've got a process to address those local concerns in any aggregated scenario. But in summary, what we're saying is any local concern can be addressed with leadership. It just requires a bit of compromise and working through the issue. And so the next slide, thanks, Dave. We have local concerns and we have financial requirements, and it's about balancing those 2 issues, because you could, for example, have 100% local voice in any organisation you're creating, but those lending the CCO monies will say, well, we actually want a professional board in place, not elected members running this organisation. So it's about balancing those concerns. So thanks, Dave. There's a couple of more. Yeah, one more. Thank you. It's about leadership to work through that balancing act. Thanks, Dave. So we've come up with design parameters. We've grouped all the local concerns into 4 categories: local voice and influence, distributional impacts, service delivery scope, standards, and transitional issues, balanced against the need for credit rating separation and the ability to borrow more. And these are parameters that we would use in co-designing any aggregated model. Thanks, Dave. So the opportunity is to develop a financially sustainable model that can better deliver on community needs, regulatory requirements, government and community expectations. And so moving on to recommendations. So these recommendations have gone from the joint forum to every council, and we're currently working through these recommendations with every council. On Tuesday, I'm forgetting the days now, Tuesday, we had 4 councils formally consider these recommendations, being Waitomo, Otorohanga, Waipa and Taupo, and all 4 have accepted these recommendations. And then yesterday we had Hauriki District Council also unanimously accepting these recommendations, and Matamata Piako have
made positive signals to go with it. It wasn't a formal meeting. So.
It was a workshop. So it's going well so far in terms of, I think a key principle has been coming back to the fact that we're diverse, not everyone's got the same needs, is trying to find a way where everybody can see themselves in the approach, and having flexibility for each council in the process going forward. So the recommendations, the first one is, if we're going to come together and work together, what are we trying to achieve? What's our vision? What are the outcomes? How do we measure success? And thanks, Dave. So our vision is te mana o te wai, te mana o te tangata. Healthy water, healthy people. And you won't be able to read the outcomes, but the first outcome is about financial sustainability. The second outcome is about having highly skilled and lifting the capability of our workforce, whether that be staff, whether that be our suppliers. The third outcome is about being customer focused and leveraging technology to help the customer see more value in the services that they're getting, help them value water more, and so on. The fourth outcome is about local voice and influence, because we've got to make sure that if we're going to have shareholder councils, that they do have influence on any organisation that they collectively own, and that they can still influence the way that services are delivered. And the last outcome is about the expectations of key partners, of stakeholders, beyond the councils involved. Thanks, Dave. And then we've come up with success measures. So we've got the outcomes on the left-hand side. The grey box in the middle are measures relating to each outcome. So just quickly, on the financial side, it's about demonstrating that we are achieving more with the same amount of revenue. In terms of workforce, that we're lifting the capability of the workforce through training, through certainty of work, those sorts of things. Being customer focused, making sure that what's being charged to customers is as affordable as possible, and that will be driven by economic regulation. Local voice, making sure there's good mechanisms to ensure that local voice and influence continues. And an example of a success measure for about meeting partner expectations would be giving effect to Treaty 7 obligations in anything that we create. Thanks, Dave. The second recommendation is probably the most important recommendation, and that is that participating councils co-design an aggregated model that's staged by function and governed by a professional board from the outset. So stage one is establishing an entity that provides what we call functional services to participating councils, noting that the end point is delivering on those success measures we just went through, and through an aggregated and fully regulated water services entity. So to dive in a bit more detail on what this recommendation means, thanks, Dave. So stage one is all about responding to critical needs that exist now, while being flexible to evolve over time. The functions we're talking about are capital works delivery, consenting, project planning and design, procurement, strategic asset management, education and training. And the focus of stage one is about driving common processes and ways of working across councils to achieve efficiency savings and building and lifting collective capability. You might say this sounds a little bit like Wellington Water, where councils still collect the revenue, they pass that revenue over to Wellington Water and they don't have enough revenue and things go belly up. The difference here is that we're asking every council to commit to the end game and not to stay in stage 1 forever. So there's got to be a commitment to that, to the end game. And for those councils who need a local CCO, we have an opportunity for them to achieve that balance sheet separation, increase their borrowing ability through this model as well, which I'll explain shortly. Thanks, Dave. So the key reasons for this approach and a staging approach is we're trying to avoid the big bang approach that we saw with the previous reforms. We're trying to focus on functions that are already largely outsourced. So minimising the impact on operations and staff. And we're trying to give time, setting up a CCO and giving it the space to prove itself. And so unlocking some scale advantages without operations or assets being transferred. Creating off-ramps. So there's a number of off-ramps where councils can exit but also on-ramps when they can come back on subject to meeting criteria. In terms of moving from stage 1 to stage 2, the idea is the professional board, which we hope will be up and running by mid next year, would take responsibility for coming up with an establishment plan to move from stage 1 to stage 2 and having that plan signed off by the shareholders. And through that establishment plan, councils can see a pathway to move their whole business across to the CCO at a time in an agreed process. Thanks, Dave. So this slide here tries to explain in stage 1 what functions stay with the council and what functions move to a regional CCO. So in stage 1, the ownership of assets, determining what ratepayers are charged, borrowing, deciding on what investment occurs in a council area, being responsible for compliance, and looking after operations all stays with the local council. And remember, the $7.5 billion sitting in the long-term plans, that's about $2.5 billion of the business. The $5 billion that is proposed that the CCO is responsible for is capital works, program management, procurement, consenting, project planning and design, strategic asset management, and education and training. And so you'd have a service agreement between the council and the CCO for those services. Thanks, Dave. So structurally, stage 1, we have a board, we have shares being held equally, no matter whether you're Waitomo or Hamilton City, you've got the same shareholding in stage 1, and service agreements between each council and the CCO. So we have participating councils, and if a council needed to get water off its books, achieve balance sheet separation, they could set up a local CCO and have a service agreement still with the regional CCO for those functions I mentioned, and still running operations out of the local CCO. Thanks, Dave. So I know there's a lot in all of what I've said, but hopefully we've got time for some discussion shortly. I'm nearly there. Recommendation 3 is that each council, each member organisation advise the forum chairs, being Mayor Toby and Chair John Bashara, of whether or not or what they think about these recommendations by the middle of September. If they don't want to continue progressing, then they would exit the work stream, and we would keep them informed. The fourth recommendation and the last recommendation is that a participating council instructs their chief executive to negotiate a heads of agreement and bring that back to each council for their approval by the end of October, with the intention that the heads of agreement is signed in November. It's non-binding. It's a non-binding agreement to demonstrate a commitment to continue to make progress, notwithstanding that heads of agreement will form the basis of formal governance documentation like constitutions and so on, which would also be brought back at a later date. Thanks, Dave. So next steps, councils are resolving, making resolutions on the recommendations. In October, they'll see a non-binding heads of agreement, subject to whether they adopt that. Then they would see governance documentation in Q1 calendar year next year. And then by the middle of next year, have a board and establishment chief executive in place for stage 1. And as I said before, that board would then take responsibility to come up with a plan to move from stage 1 to stage 2. It might take 3 years, it might take 5 years to move from stage 1 to stage 2, but that will be up to the shareholders. And I think the last slide is the scope of the heads of agreement. So firstly, identifying those key governance documents, constitution, shareholders agreement, letter of expectations. How do we set up the stage 1 entity? What are the steps involved? What are the roles and responsibilities of each partner? How are decisions made in stage 1? A commitment to that endpoint, stage 2, and identifying how we move from stage 1 to stage 2. And then what are the agreed exit ramps and what are the agreed on ramps? So you could, for example, get a council that doesn't need a CCO on day 1. They might co-design this organisation. They might decide to exit after the adoption of the governance documents. But in 3 years' time, they might say, well, hey, we're really struggling on our own. And there's an agreed on-ramp for them to come into the CCO. So there's that flexibility subject to meeting the criteria that are agreed through this process. So thank you, Chair Pamela and Council, for enabling us to share, and open for any questions, discussion and so on.
Okay, we'll go to the Chief Executive for comment, and then I have a question.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I just wanted to note the appreciation of the team that's been involved in inviting me in to be part of these discussions to date. They didn't have to, because in one sense this is about territorial local authorities and how they're managing their water and so on. But it's been, I just want to note that appreciation formally. The other thing I just put to councillors is that, and it's probably the last comment that Vaughan made actually, I've been starting to think about actually could or would we be interested in perhaps wanting to have some involvement in the stage 1, not because we have assets that we'd probably see in the immediate future that we might want to be involved, but if stage 1 is about agreeing kind of what loose term the rules of the game are going forward, we might want to have a view on that and influence it, with a view to perhaps at some later date we might be interested in getting more involved ourselves with some of our own asset management, or as stormwater comes closer to us in a rural sort of scene, there could be interest. Now, I haven't had a chance to discuss this in terms of what that would mean, resource-wise and whatever, but I just put that out there, just maybe some of your thinking to include in it, because it is something that has largely been a territorial authority type of discussion and construct, but it doesn't preclude our ability to perhaps want to be involved at an early stage.
Thanks for that, Chris, because that really leads to what my question was before I open it up to the other councillors. Just, are you able to help focus our thinking on where is regional council's place in this? What is the advantage or the disadvantage of being in or out at this stage? Just noting that the vast majority of our assets are flood infrastructure and drainage assets. So just wondering if you wanted to add some commentary for councillors to consider that question that our chief executive has posed.
But the way I would see it is, obviously as the regulator, you have to maintain your independence and ensure that you're being seen to operate in an unbiased manner. But in recognising that and accepting that, I think both you as the regulator and us as the provider of these types of services, essentially we've got an agreement on the outcome. We all want to do what's required and necessary. We all want to ensure that we're meeting the expectations of our communities. You're representing them in one way, we're representing them in another. And we would hope that by having some form of aggregation, that relationship with the regulator can agree on outcomes that we both believe in and can see ways of achieving those outcomes that meets your needs and our needs. Now, if Matamata Pia could come along and talk about what it would like to do, it doesn't carry, let's be blunt, it doesn't carry the same gravitas. And it doesn't necessarily achieve the outcomes that we both believe in the most efficient way possible. And that's the health of the river. And I'll just remark at this point, there's one thing that is unique about the Waikato, in my opinion. Now, there may be a disagreement on this, but we have got across all our major catchments, Waikato, we've got the Waikato River Authority, co-governance entity. We've got in the Hauraki Co-Governance Forum, which has been identified as part of the treaty settlement, which is yet to be ratified, but it's coming down the tracks. And the other one, of course, is the Hauraki Gulf Forum. So we have got 3 co-governance entities established on our major catchments and receiving waters. Now, the regulator has clearly a part to play in maintaining or assisting or supporting the effective, operations of those entities. And so it's a question of us not compromising the role of the regulator, but rather working with them in a way that achieves the most effective outcome for the communities we both represent.
I've thought of 4 potential roles. First is around thought leadership, because you're the only organisation that thinks regionally and can act regionally often. And that's what we're trying to do, and help councils understand the benefits of that regional approach while ensuring strong local influence and presence and so on. The second one is around technical leadership, and we've already started to have some conversations with Tracy's team around, is there any merit in this sort of catchment approach to consenting, and if we were to come up with a compliance strategy that's evidence-based, what could that look like? And so that's another important role. The third is what Chris alluded to, is that one day you might want to look at some of the assets that you have that are water related, and whether or not there's merit in being part of a regional capital works program because I suppose if you start getting some decent scale from all the other councils and you're trying to compete in terms of your own program, there might be merit in going, hey, let's without compromising the regulatory role, hold hands together a bit more. And then I think the last opportunity is shared services in the technology space. We've talked about asset management being needed. There isn't a single asset management system across all the councils. Again, you're regional, you've got that sort of technology. Maybe there could be a shared services opportunity between what we're trying to create and what the regional council already has. So just a few ideas there.
Great. Thank you for that. I just feel that helps councillors sort of frame their thinking as they ask further questions. All right, I've got Councillor Hughes, Councillor Kneebone, and Councillor Marr. Councillor Hughes.
Thanks, Chair Pam. Don and Vaughan, thanks very much for your presentation. Much appreciated. I'm actually very encouraged to think that, common sense has prevailed. This is very much the Castalia model that was promulgated at an early date, and it sort of picks up on all the deliverables that I think will end up with a good result. As a Hamilton ratepayer, though, I am concerned when I look at my current water rates, which is your model there, which is $1,500, going to $5.50 or whatever the number, which is about a 260% increase over the next 10 years. Mm. When I look at the compliance chart, which you've got there, Hamilton City is there's only two of us that comply with the current requirements. So I have to, as a ratepayer, I have to ask the question, why is my rates going up by 260% when we're already compliant? Mm. So that's my first question. And the second one is relating to your charging model, which I like, if I'm understanding it correctly, which means that the service delivery model is not going to be responsible charging and collecting the rates. That's still going to be to sit with the local council. So if we don't like what they're doing, we can kick them where it hurts. So is my understanding correct on that? So yeah, I guess the big burning question is why the massive increase when we know the service delivery company is going to have access to cheap money at a much higher level than what's currently available?
My understanding is, and those figures are supplied by the councils themselves, but the biggest demand for Hamilton, as I understand it, is growth and dealing with the growth costs associated with their infrastructure. So more houses, more infrastructure, more. And whilst the developers pay for it, they come on the Hamilton City books and they depreciate on the Hamilton City books, and they're a depreciable liability on their books. So I suspect that's what we've been told, is growth is their biggest driver. As far as your second question is concerned,
it was about
charging, yeah,
ring fencing of charges back to each council. You're right. Then in stage one, it might be that in stage two, after a number of years, there's comfort amongst shareholders to start to harmonise prices across between districts, but that's not a conversation that we expect people to be comfortable with in the short term.
And it's interesting to note the legislation will allow for a fully separated, regulated CCO. This is stage two. If you want to create stage two next year, well, that'd be great. But I don't think that's going to happen. But if you did go to the full CCO, the law will allow CCOs to charge their users directly. In other words, the local authority will not be party to that process. And that will drive things that I think regional council have been probably wanting for a long time. That will drive water metering across all our users.
So under the present rating system, rates levy has a charge on the property, effectively a charge on the property of the owner. Of the property.
Yeah.
So under the present, on that stage one model, the water service delivery company wouldn't have that facility in place? It would still rest with the local
It could, but we're not proposing it at stage 1 yet. Okay. Can I also just, as you're probably aware, Hamilton City and the way that it collects its water revenue is quite unique in that it's attached to the general rate. So it's sort of a targeted rate like most councils. And so depending on the value of your property at the moment, depends on how much money you're paying for your water rates. And Hamilton City need to ring fence their water business and separate it out off the general rate. And so they're going on their own journey to achieve that ring fencing. And that's why I would probably regard those figures up there for Hamilton City as indicative, because it's been really hard to understand what actually is being collected and what's being spent in respect of Hamilton City.
Councillor Kneebone.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, guys. Appreciate this. A couple of 2 or 3 issues. Am I hearing correctly that the rules that the government have put over the top of this would enable our flood protection infrastructure to come under the heading of a water service, in which case if we did want to join the boat further down the track with our own infrastructure projects, we could do that? Because if that was the case, I think it's something that we should do, that we'd absolutely need to be on board.
In terms of the government's definition of 3 waters, I don't think it includes the regional council's assets at this point in time. So it would be something that we would work through.
Yeah.
And I think we've got a pretty enabling government that would make sure, I suppose, that at the end of the day, if there is a benefit to the community, that flexibility is provided for.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is our provision of flood protection infrastructure is facing the same challenges as 3 waters is. So why wouldn't we?
Same contract.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, Calvin, you'll put people online. You're going to get back on.
Great, thank you. I'll just add to that, notwithstanding that the assets may not be able to go into that entity as it currently stands, that does not diminish the ability of regional council to benefit from working with the TAs to come up with a smart program of capital work, so you don't get lumpiness and price volatility, and you make sure that you've got the access to resource that you need when you need it.
Yep, thanks. Another one was the concept of price harmonisation that you're calling it here, and acknowledge what you just said to Chris, and I'm hearing that that's still a discussion that has to happen down the track. To me, it's a crucial one because that's been the elephant in the room to date, and if we can't get past that, then this whole kaupapa is not going to work. And look, I'm a waipa ratepayer. We're in a much more privileged situation than the likes of Waitomo, so but if we want Waitomo and Piu to exist in the future, then we've got to work together, so that would be my feedback on that. The third one, there's a comment in here that councils still remain the regulated entity, and maybe you haven't got to this one either in the detail, but I'm trying to understand how that would work, given we've got a CCO sitting over the whole top, which effectively takes on the responsibility of managing it, and one would assume the responsibility if something goes wrong.
I think, so certainly in stage 2, it will be a fully regulated entity and responsible for all compliance. In stage 1, if we're leaving operations with the local council, then any compliance issues associated with operations would still sit with the council. But if there are, if the entity is responsible for capital works and there's some compliance issues associated with capital works, then the entity would be responsible for that type of compliance. So you'd probably say both have compliance responsibilities in stage 1, depends whether it's operational or capital.
Okay. So this comment's more of reference to stage one, not
Yes,
down the
yes.
track. Yeah, okay, no, that's cool. No, thank you. Yeah.
If I could, Chair Pamela, in response to your first comment about cross-subsidisation, and if you ever get the opportunity, and I think I might have flicked a copy of it to Chris, I'm not sure, there was an interview done on RNZ 18 months ago with the Chief Executive of Water. Now, Tasmania amalgamated its council waters, 22 councils from memory, and under an organisation, a CCO, called Water. And they spoke hugely highly of the mayors did of their entity. And the key thing as to why they spoke very highly of them, besides all the, the grunt they brought to the process, in terms of grunt and specialist and professionals and all the rest of it, which are not available necessarily at district council level. Besides those wins, the chief executive and the chairperson of the company formed strong relationships with each of their council owners. And it's about developing trust. And it's like anything, it's like any organisation dealing with another organisation. Ultimately, it comes down to developing trust, communicating well, respecting each other. And in that sense, you can move to deal with some of those difficult, politically sensitive matters in time, hence what we're talking about. The first phase is to build up trust. This organisation can operate in a way that people feel that they are not being dominated by them, but by being respected by them.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Marr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions. First one up around the professional board. Who appoints that? And can you just outline for me the skills that you see those board members holding?
Well, if I look at the business is regulatory, relationship, iwi, engineering, financial, legal. So in appointing any board, what's the business and what skill sets do you think are appropriate to put around a board that effectively, ultimately, at the end of the day, can hold the chief executive and the staff feet to the fire? Because in our current model, and hence the benefit of having a professional board with those skill sets, the current model, councils are hugely reliant on their staff. And it's really difficult to unpick that or to ask the questions that need to be asked. The second part?
Just around the appointments, I'm assuming that's the councils that shareholder.
Yeah. Shareholders would have.
Yeah. Yep. And the second one probably come to Director May behind me, but Tracy, do you have any comments around Vaughan's comments around that consenting applications and the benefit of amalgamation? Sorry.
Morning, councillors. Through the chair, it's a concept that Vaughan has just floated the last couple of weeks with Mike Scarsbrook and myself. So we are looking at it. I think there are definite benefits if we start to line up with some of the outcomes that we're looking to achieve, both in a regulatory and non-regulatory space for our catchment. So I think there's definitely some work there to be done. I also think there's probably some learnings we can look to some of our other councils who have tried to tackle it throughout the country as well. So I think there's a conversation there definitely to be had. Also has potential to dovetail into some of our regional spatial strategy thinking as well.
Thank you, President. Thank you,
Councillor Nicol.
Really? Kia ora. I really like what you've presented.
I've had discussions over the past couple of years with various exec team members, and I see a lot of the concerns and ideas reflected. And I can tell you've thought about this really deeply, and you're very well qualified to advise. I just think you're a great team to be doing this for our region, because we know it's difficult to do that region-wide stuff. A question I had, and I am keen to explore the involvement of regional council. Really like the 4 points you raised, Vaughan. I think that as long as we're not an obstacle to getting the TAs collaborating, making them nervous or complicating it further and then scaring people, as long as that's not the case, and we are, we give consents to ourselves currently in this building, so we know how to manage that and we're confident with that, then I am 100% on board with that for getting the benefits long term for the expensive infrastructure we have as well. Question I just had was the infrastructure agency and other announcements of the last few days. Is there any reflections that you've got now in context of what you're trying to do here, how that might make things easier? Or
well, I think the bigger size does have benefit in this case in terms of infrastructure. I mean, I hope I'm not saying anything I shouldn't say, in the sense that we have had a history, this is well spoken about, well documented, had a history of chopping and changing our policy frames depending on which way the political winds are blowing. And we'll see it this year in the GPS for transport. We see significant projects that soak up hundreds of millions of dollars and then they're abandoned. Three Waters, they spent $1.5 billion on this process, and then we change our mind overnight. Now, I respect the fact that they're political decisions, but if you create entities like this that are able to strengthen the supply chain, help strengthen the contracting industry. And if I understand what the government's cross-party are trying to do, and that is agree on what they can agree, stay with it, and allow the industry to develop to the point where it can be more efficient and give us better value for money. At the moment, by way of example, when we're looking at 67 local authorities, we go and design pump stations totally different to what Hauraki District does. We go and use different pumps to what Hamilton City do. How silly is that? It's silly. We're treating a complex, highly expensive piece of infrastructure as if it were a cottage industry. My opinion, we have to change. And it's about risk management, it's about ensuring that that complexity and the challenge of meeting significant investment in a considered way, that the risk of things going wrong are minimised. We're very vulnerable. I mean, we've got a key person that just announced the other day they're leaving. Now, I don't have four of them. I have one of them. So,
let alone in the smaller councils.
Well, that's right. And, and I've been candid with our council. We cannot continue as we are.
And if I could just follow up, I suppose when we got good feedback on the before the deluge preparation of requesting central government funding, just from coming together as a regional sector. I can imagine that aggregation and I realise currently Prime Minister's making a lot of noises about no handouts from central government, but we don't know that these things change from time to time. So it's for local government, perhaps in future, easier to get that. And last point was just in keeping future resilience challenges in mind with climate change hat on. It'll be really great for this board to think very innovatively, more so than each council could do on their own, to bring in those nature-based type systems, microsystems that you just wouldn't think of perhaps if you have one engineer and one council, I suppose. And actually, Councillor Smith, he's not here, but he did make a great point a few weeks ago around the fact that there is a limited supply of these fantastic board members. And so obviously if there are lots of little CCOs, one per council, a lot harder to get that quality. So I think you could mention that might help getting some people on board as well, because that's that.
All right, I would like to wrap this up if we can, but I did see Councillor Cookson wanted to raise an issue.
Thank you. I went to the Zone 2 meeting, I think was in February, and a lot of what you said today, a couple of us said that there, that we must work together better as a catchment of intake and the waste, and look at it as a total catchment, not as an individual councils or organisations down a whole scheme or a whole. So I'm really glad that's come up in here. Hopefully that was the start of the spark that got some of that talked about, because I totally agree with that. And I understand when you're talking about drainage and flood protection. I've got real issues of, do we want it in there? But I understand if you're working as an investment to get capital works done, working together is better than working individually. Totally agree with that. And when we went down to Wellington to the infrastructure, what was it? Forum.
Yeah.
And I sat for 2 days with one of the head people of Philligan Hogan, from Auckland. I can't remember his name right now, but he basically said, we all got to start working better together. They're already building their organisation up to start taking on some of these big projects. What they need is a 10 and 20-year plan. They said they will actually deliver these projects at 40% cost savings, but we got to have the skills and the people in place to drive this forward for the next 20, not 10 years. 10 years is not enough. Yeah, no. It's 20, 30 years that we have these, because we're going to have to bring people in to do to fill these positions in these organisations. We haven't got the skills anymore sitting here in New Zealand at all. So they are, as I said, Philligan Hogan and others are really getting geared up for this, and we just got to get in bed with them and say, yes, we're ready to drive it forward. And so support everything you've done, because that's basically what's come out of that infrastructure in Wellington 2 months ago. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Cookson. All right, councillors, I know that this report was put in front of us as more of a FYI and to be received, but I think we've heard some rationale for why WRC might choose to get involved at this stage, and I recognize that other districts are and the City Council are making their own decision, but we have heard around that ability for WRC to provide a thought leadership role from a regional perspective, provide that technical leadership around that catchment-based approach to consenting, as Councillor Cookson has just reiterated, acknowledging the assets of WRC may at some stage, it makes sense to include. And so wanting to make sure that we're able to influence some of the structure, some of the perhaps some of the governance criteria and structure. There's some benefit in that, and also that shared services opportunity. So I'm just looking around the table. Councillor Kneebone, did you want to move something in that direction?
Yeah, I was just looking at the timing. You want something by mid-September, which is only 2 weeks away.
Which is why I'm encouraging us to make a decision today if we can.
I'm quite comfortable with these kind of almost in principle type recommendations that our council supported. I'd be happy to move.
Would you be happy to move that? I'm happy to second that. Any further comment? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Sorry, I'm the seconder. Anybody opposed? Nope, motion passed. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Kelvin and Dawn and Vaughn. Really appreciate the time you've taken to come today and help our council absorb the the information and be able to ask questions and get a fulsome view of how the role we might play as a council, but also how this continues to support the Waikato region as a whole going forward. So kia ora for that. All right, councillors, it is 11:02. We will take a 5-minute break. So we'll be back. I'm going to say, let's call it 11:10. We'll be back at 11:10. Kia ora. All right, councillors. Let's continue on. Thank you very much, everybody, for your engagement with that last item. I think that was a great decision on behalf of this region, so pleased with that outcome. Okay, we are now on item 7.2. This is on page 62 of your sheet. Did you see it on my written sheet? No. All right, this is on page 62 of your agendas, the health and safety report for August 2024. Welcome, Stu.
Morning. I'll take the report as read and take you through a few of the key insights from it. You'll see the safeguard update there. Professor Wiles has been a high profile case through with a $20,000 award coming out the other side for a lack of care for her safety. So that's just a good example of both the Health and Safety at Work Act and the Employment Relations Act having a requirement for safety at work. We progressed through the report, moving to point 20, and you'll see there that we had an incident with two staff who were out in a ute, and we're sitting at a stop-go that was a controlled site, and a bit of a shock to them. One of the diggers that was on the site turned around and knocked a tree over onto the top of the vehicle. So yeah, totally unexpected. Dave actually possibly has a picture for us to have a look at that. So you can see there that the vehicle was a write-off. An ambulance was called and the two staff members were taken off to be checked over, and one had a concussion and was off for a couple of weeks, but thankfully has recovered well and is back at work. The team did a fantastic job in the incident in managing the situation and looking after the staff. It was really great to see, and there has been an investigation that's been carried out by the team and Property and Fleet to see what learnings there are for us there. One of the interesting things that came out of it was our smart track. Whenever there's a collision, it alerts us to that. Because this came from the sky, it didn't alert smart track, so that's something that we're looking at. It's a fairly unusual situation. But thankfully the staff are okay. The vehicle can be replaced, and it was notifiable, and the contractor that was managing the site has notified it and is working through the investigation.
Sorry, just can I understand that? That's that tracking that didn't trigger.
Yeah, so it's a collision based tracking, so it's for impact that you would have in an accident, normally vehicle to vehicle or crashing into something, but it doesn't have any sensory active things in the roof.
Right.
So yeah, we didn't. It didn't go off, so it was just an interesting thing.
Oh.
But,
Did you have a question on that? Yeah. Go ahead, Councillor Cookson.
None of their mobile devices went off, because I would have thought in something like that the SOS would have been activated.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. I haven't got the full investigation through. That's still happening, but that we'll have a look at that, because I know that some of the iPhone technology now is linked to
I recently had an accident in March or April when both of my mobile phones went off. No, but no, but as an incident that it marked it that it took place.
Can I just make the comment that I believe the vehicle was stationary at the time.
It was.
So it wouldn't be triggered by any sudden stop in movement or
Deceleration.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And it is an unusual one, as Stu said. It was a controlled forestry site. We were only in there because we were told we could go in there, but obviously something's gone wrong on the site. Hence, the WorkSafe investigation isn't about us. It's about how the site was being managed.
So why didn't the staff implement the SOS on their phones?
Oh, the SOS is we have an inReach function. Obviously, when this happened, there was lots of people around. The contractor was there, the staff were there, ambulance was called immediately. So they weren't, isolated or alone when it happened. So I think all the precautions that were reasonable were taken at the time.
Just asking.
carry on with your report.
Okay, thank you. As we move through, you'll see there in 21-22 the tier 1 and 2 leadership walkarounds. I think at the previous meeting there was some discussion around that, and there was interest just to see how that's going. So we have tracked that, and you'll see that we've completed 14 of those across the past 12 months, and some of the key insights are shared there. So that's been going really well, and it's been good to have that engagement with staff and the actions that come from that. On the next page, you'll see that we have reasonably high absences. We've had COVID, influenza, and there's been a couple of bouts of that and some Castro bugs out there. So that's spiked our numbers a bit, reasonably high. And I guess we had a discussion about it at ELT, and Tracy made a good point that COVID was previously separated out, and that's now included in the numbers. So you see that higher than would have been previous. And the only other thing, just to make note, under the employee assistance, I know that we talk about that quite often, and it's a constant focus for us. And we obviously have our EAP service, and I think it was mentioned last 2 months ago about the Rongowa Māori offering in that space, and we've got good yarns in the wellbeing team, and we've also got our My Everyday Wellbeing going on there. We have engaged with Tim from My Everyday Wellbeing, and while we send out emails to staff on that, and there's lots of things that they can do and pick up from those emails, some of our on-the-ground physical work staff don't have access to that so readily, and they've developed toolbox sessions for that we're going to trial in Northgate and Powra to give those guys access to that. So that was just something additional that we're doing in that space. So that's the highlights of the report. Happy to take any other questions.
Councillor Nicol.
Thank you, Stu, for the additional info on the ELT walkarounds. I used to do them myself in a previous life. I was wondering, you've got 14 in the past year, and that's tier 1 and tier 2. Do you have a method kind of for tracking a bit whether each person actually gets to do one in a year, or that they are spread? Because I see a lot of them are in ICM, and I realise there's more risk there, but you know, there's a real risk that some tier 1, tier 2 leadership team members wouldn't actually have much exposure to this, looking at those numbers, or that there might be some departments that just get missed out entirely.
Yeah, no, we do. We have good engagement that's discussed at ELT, and the executive are engaged in it and are active in it. We have identified the critical risks throughout the organisation, and that's aligned with what those walkarounds will be. And obviously, in my role, and Chris often gets out there too to look more often, I guess, which is good. So,
okay, so you've got no concern it's falling too much on some people or on some departments?
No, I think that it's pretty evenly spread.
It's good to hear. Thank you.
Just a question regarding that EAP services and that council's utilization falls in the upper recommended percentage. Any commentary on that?
Yeah. I guess that's was it 7 to 14% is the range that they recommend. I guess it's good to see that we're within the range, and that when you see the spread there, the 70% of those services are being accessed for personal use and 30% for work related. We're told that that's fairly normal and good to see, so there's no concern there, and it's pleasing that we're still taking it up, and that the number of sessions per engagement are in line with what they would expect as well, so that's good.
Okay, so we're not concerned that we're at 12.7 and the upper recommended is 15. I guess I'm trying to understand, if one was above 15, what does that indicate for an organization?
So we're not concerned, no, and I guess if we got beyond that recommended, we would start to look, and I guess then you would start to look, has the change in the personal versus work, or what's going on in the business, those kind of things. So,
Any other questions from councillors? If not, thank you. I've got a mover in Councillor Marr, a second in Councillor Hughes. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Hey, thank you very much for that. We always like good pictures, or like not good pictures, as they may be.
Yeah.
But always useful in ensuring that councillors have a picture of what has happened.
Yep.
So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. All right, councillors, we now move on to item 7.3. This is on page 70 of your agenda. This is in regards to the Tahuya Super Gold concession changes. This is coming to us as a result of a recommendation out of the Future Proof Public Transport Subcommittee. So I'll turn over to you criminy, Phil. Sorry, Phil. It's just a moment. Not enough caffeine yet this morning. Over to you, Phil, and Angela. I'll just come to you after he's done. If there's anything you want to add. Kia ora.
Morena koutou. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to the report. I'm going to pass straight to James Llewellyn, who's the report author, who's online, if that's okay, and then we'll happy to answer any questions.
Great.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Thanks very much for the opportunity to just briefly introduce this paper, which I will take as read. As was mentioned in the introduction, this paper was previously presented to the Future Proof Public Transport Subcommittee, and in particular there were a number of recommendations from an independent review that was undertaken as a result of the 2-year Tahuya review that was ultimately approved by the NZTA board. So the independent review came up with 2 particular recommendations to address one of the key challenges that we have with Tahuya, which is to increase the level of fare box recovery, that is the revenue from passengers as a proportion of operating costs, which is a key requirement of government policy as expressed through the government policy statements on land transport. So the first recommendation was to remove the current arrangement for free fares for Super Gold cardholders on the 2 peak time services that Tahuya operates, one from Hamilton Franklin to Auckland and another in the opposite direction. The second recommendation was to investigate the introduction of a 50% concessionary fare for children aged 5 to 15 years of age. And the reason for this was to try and encourage group family travel in particular, which is a particular popular activity at weekends on the weekend service. So rather than every member of, let's say, a 2 adult and 2 children household paying the full fare, up to 15 years, the children would pay half fare, and that would also then encourage the adults to pay the full fare as well, and everyone to travel together. So although the recommendation was to investigate, the Future Proof Public Transport Subcommittee were keen to actually introduce that particular proposal. So hence the report to this council is making that recommendation today. In terms of introduction, that's really all I would like to say. There's a lot of analysis in the report, which I'm happy to talk about, but I will now hand it over to questions and comments. Thank you.
All right. Angela, as the deputy chair of that committee, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Pamela. Thank you, Phil, and thank you, James, for the report, and James, your presentation today as well. Basically, at our committee, our last committee meeting, the feel of the committee was that this would be a move which would bring us more in line with what the GPS was directing towards fare box recovery. It would also bring us more in line nationwide with the Super Gold policy that other regions follow. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that. Cool, thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Marr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, James, just looking at your table 4, the difference between the base and then column 3, which the only difference is the children are now half fare. You indicate a sort of an extra 7,000 children would ride the train. What's the thinking behind that increase?
So through the chair, we have made an assumption that a 50% concessionary fare would generate an additional 10% of child travel that otherwise wouldn't happen if they had to pay the full fare. The challenge we have is that we don't have sufficient historic data to be able to come up with forecasts which provide any more degree of granularity, but that is what we believe is a reasonable assumption.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Councillor Kneebaum.
So I'm happy to move the recommendations.
I think the onus is on us to increase fare box recovery with the direction we've been given. I think this is a good balance of getting a contribution from over 65s in line with what's happening nationally, and also increasing that incentive for travelling as families. I personally use Te Huia from Huntly, and so to pay the 50% fare for children makes sense to me, just in context of what it would cost and what you'd expect as a service. And I look forward to seeing how this changes again over time, obviously, but it's a considered response by the committee.
I am pleased that that we're going to be able to continue, if this is enacted, that we're going to be looking at the impacts that this has, because not having the historic data is a bit of a hamstring. So really looking forward to what might come out of this in terms of data that supports our decision making going forward on Te Huia. Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I feel like I'm being picked on, but I'm happy to second the motion.
Nice. All right. Okay. All right, if there's no other questions, we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Good stuff. Hey, thank you, James. Appreciate your report and your presentation today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, councillors, we are now on to our last item. This is item 7.4. This is on page 80 of your agenda, and it is in regard to the reallocation of excess remuneration.
I'd like to recommend option 3. Move that. I think that's the logical way. Yep.
So option 3, just for those who are online and only looking at the agenda before them, there was an additional option that was circulated via email after the publishing of this agenda. So I'm just wondering if we go to you, Dave, to talk through that.
Certainly. I've popped on the screen what we are recognising as option 3 in terms of a determination proposal. The underlying gist of this is that all of the remunerable positions remain unchanged, and with the surplus pool that is remaining from the changes to the Environmental Performance Committee Chair and Deputy, we are creating a new position for Deputy Chairs of Council committees with more than one committee. So when one person holds multiple Deputy Chair roles, and we are simply using the excess pool to create that position. But other than that new position being created, all other remuneration payments remain unchanged in this option.
And I understand correctly, you've had communication from Councillor Smith that he is supportive of this way forward as well.
That's correct. Councillor Smith managed to find some internet access in a rainforest in North Queensland and did contact me to confirm that he was happy with option 3 as a proposal.
Very good. All right. I do note in the chat that Councillor Graff has seconded the motion. So we've got a mover and a seconder for that option 3. Councillor Nicol,
No,
any
that was all I was
further
going to do, second it, and
comment?
just appreciate Councillor Strange work as a deputy of those committees, doing a fair bit of work getting around, especially when it comes to being a spokesperson for Tuia and such things. So
Yeah,
happy, and also nice not to see those ratios. They confuse the hell out of me sometimes.
yeah,
This
yes.
works well. Thank you.
Yes, well, and certainly support what you're saying, Councillor Nicol. I think in particular being the deputy chair of the Future Proof Public Transport Committee, seeing as that has an independent chair, Councillor Strange has had to be the one who fronts the commentary, the media responses that often come as a result of the agenda items before that particular committee. Councillor Marr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually support option 1. I think it just evenly spreads across everybody as they sit at the moment and as we discussed at the beginning of the triennium. But as this benefits Councillor Strange, I'd just like to hear a justification on workload, etc., and why she believes that extra remuneration should come solely to her. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, taking, without making it personal, if you look at the position above, deputy chair of one committee on a considerable number more than what is proposed in option 3, and workload for that one committee compared to workload for 3 deputy chair positions. We could go into detail on that if you like. However, justifying my workload to make it personal.
It's personal, isn't it? For the only beneficiary of this, how can it?
Yeah, let's just as much detail as you would like to go into or not. We do have a mover and a seconder for this.
Absolutely. Councillor Downard and myself work incredibly hard on RTC. Through the RTC process, each triennium, we have hearings. Hearings for the long-term plan of the region's transport is something that I was heavily involved in as the Deputy Chair. Councillor Downard is very inclusive, including me in any agenda setting meetings. As for the Future Proof Public Transport Subcommittee, many a time that committee is
I think that Councillor Strange, as I have already indicated, as the deputy chair of that with an independent chair, it does fall on you as the elected official, the senior elected official, to front the decisions of that committee and to respond to any queries that come. So I think that I've already covered the additional responsibilities that come with that particular deputy chair role. All right, we have a mover and a seconder for option 3. All those in favor? Opposed?
Aye.
Carried. All right, thank you very much, councillors. That takes us through the agenda. I appreciate everybody's attendance. I appreciate your support in paying due heed to the significant decisions before us and making sure that we spend our time and energy on those items that are of greatest significance in terms of moving our region forward as a whole. So thank you very much for that. All right, Mr. Chief Executive, we'll conclude with a karakia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ona hea mai te uru tapanui, kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te hinanaru, i te ara takatu, kua rā e rongo, e whakaria aki ki runga, kia tina, humie, huie, tai kie.
Thank you very much, councillors. We'll declare the meeting closed at 11:36 a.m.